The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, President of the Government of Spain. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, President of the Government of Spain, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ambassadors and delegates. Last Sunday, September 19th at 3:12 p.m., a volcano erupted on the Spanish island of Palma in the Canary Islands. Since then, all of Spain has been following developments on the island, and the government is devoted to its inhabitants who have seen how the lava has erased homes, agricultural lands, farms, fertile lands, and an enormous emotional memory whose value no one can measure. I come to this assembly directly from the island, impressed by how nature once again reminds us of our fragility. But also it reminds us of our strengths, because thanks to science we have been able to anticipate the answer, and thanks to the effective and coordinated action of our state and emergency services, we have guaranteed the safety of all citizens, and we will not allow anyone to be left helpless after this natural disaster. Over the last year and a half, we believed that the whole world was united around these same realities. On the one hand, our fragility in the face of a virus that does not respect borders, ideologies, or social condition, or on the other, a spirit of unity and confidence in science that has led us, among other things, to develop effective vaccines against COVID-19 in an astonishingly short time frame. But the truth is that, despite appearances, the coronavirus also reinforced inequalities. The poorest regions lack the health infrastructure necessary to stop the spread of the disease, as well as the resources to create a social safety net to protect their citizens from an economic crisis. The pandemic taught us that we are all fragile, but it also reminded us that intolerable inequalities persist in this world, which are exacerbated by global crises such as COVID-19. Today, for example, my country is filled with hope as we embark on a new period of recovery and transformation. We're doing this hand in hand with the successful vaccination campaign, which has now enabled 75% of our population to be fully vaccinated. This rate is in bitter contrast, I must say, with countries where the percentage of those protected against COVID-19 barely reaches 1% of the population. This is the case of a country on which all eyes are focused today. I'm referring, of course, to Afghanistan. As you know, on August 21st of this year, together with the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the President of the European Commission, I visited the first Afghans who, coming from Kabul, arrived at Torrijón de Ardoz Air Force Base just outside Madrid. I can assure you that I will always remember the faces of these women, men, and children, today's victims of geopolitical strategies and conflicts mired in the past, victims of ignorance and contempt between nations, victims of the terror associated with fanaticism and extremism, victims of the lack of a strong state able to support a free society, victims of an unjust and unsustainable model of development, and finally, victims of climate and health emergencies that we are currently experiencing. In other words, those people were living witnesses to the greatest evils that threaten our planet. Undoubtedly, we can observe problems from afar as something foreign and distant, but I believe that we are here to do just the opposite. We are here to provide common answers to needs and challenges which are common to all of humanity. This is why, Mr. President, I have come to this podium to call for three things. Firstly, I call for the defense of robust states with resources able to guarantee the well-being of their citizens, according to the values of justice, progress, and equality. We must promote a just recovery that is capable of closing the vast gap of inequality that we have. Secondly, I call for the defence of democracy as the sole alternative in the face of any totalitarian, exclusionary and intolerant movement. And I also call for the defence of international cooperation and multilateralism as the only way forward to provide real solutions to the challenges that the world is facing today. These are, in my view, the three cross-cutting principles which must guide every step that we take in the new times ahead of us, whose great global goals are logically vaccination, socio-economic recovery and the ecological transition. My political calling was born of a lesson that my grandfather taught me and which I never forgot, and it's particularly valuable now. In the long run, inequality only creates poverty, and what is fair to everyone ends up being beneficial for all. Nothing exemplifies this principle better than the dilemma that the world is now facing regarding vaccination. We see a new divide between countries, which not only creates a sense of injustice, but also presents a risk to global health, because no one is going to be safe until everyone is safe. This is why science reminds us of this time and again. Your health is our health. There are no walls or borders that are able to defend some from the suffering of others. This is why we must act immediately, ethically and smartly. And that's why I would like to announce that Spain will increase its donation of vaccinations to third countries by 7.5 million doses. Instead of the 22.5 million that we had previously pledged, we will donate 30 million, and we will continue to raise this amount as much as we possibly can. I would also like to stress the severity of this situation in Latin America and the Caribbean. With 9% of the world's population, it has suffered nearly 30% of deaths due to the coronavirus. For this reason, my government has sought to prioritize support for this region of Latin America and the Caribbean, fulfilling the commitment that I announced during the Ibero-American Summit earlier this year. Spain has already sent more than 7.5 million doses of vaccines through COVAX and also bilaterally. And of the remaining 22.5 million doses of vaccines that Spain will be donating in the coming months, the government of Spain commits to send another 7.5 million doses to Latin America and the Caribbean. Because in these tough times, Spain must stand shoulder to shoulder with the nations with which we share so much in the Latin American and Caribbean region. Furthermore, in addition to all of this, we're going to earmark 7.5 million doses of vaccines for sub-Saharan Africa and for the European Union's southern neighbourhood. I would also like to announce that we will contribute €2 million to UNITAID, responsible for the ACT Accelerator Diagnostics pillar, in addition to the €175 million that Spain has already devoted to the development and production of vaccines between 2020 and 2021, and to our contributions to the diagnostics pillar through the Global Fund. We are going to work, therefore, with countries in special need of capacity building in order to tackle the pandemic. And finally, I would like to underline that patent rights can never be an obstacle to addressing this global health emergency. Totally unprecedented. Therefore, I reiterate my call to resolve bottlenecks in production and distribution, including a possible temporary waiver on vaccine patents and the elimination of obstacles throughout the value chain. I sincerely believe that the pandemic has laid bare another self-evident truth, very important. Only the exceptional measures and resources mobilized by governments across the world, each according to its possibilities, have prevented economic and social devastation of unprecedented proportions. The government of Spain has faced this emergency from a very clear standpoint, that of the welfare state and multilateralism. We have agreed historic measures with our EU partners and have favoured a just recovery defined by the fundamental premise of not leaving anyone behind. And it gives me, in this respect, great satisfaction to see that many other governments are following this same path, facilitating a global paradigm shift with respect to the mistakes made in past crises. Without question, it is now time to reverse the inequalities and public service cutbacks that so weakened our societies in the face of the unexpected arrival of the pandemic. And that's why I'll say this once again, there is no such thing as a purely national solution. If we champion equality as the guarantee of progress in our societies, we must also do so in the international sphere, following the same principle that I mentioned earlier, that of finding common solutions for global problems. We seek to guarantee high quality, inclusive and equitable education, of course in my country Spain, but also worldwide. And for this reason, my country recently announced a new contribution of 20 million euros to the Global Partnership for Education. We endeavour to fight poverty and exclusion in all its forms in Spain and worldwide, and gender inequality in Spain and worldwide, reforming our development model to make it more sustainable. This is why we welcome the historic agreement on international taxation that was reached at the beginning of July. And here I call upon each and every country to join this initiative and implement the agreement as soon as possible. We seek to ensure that international financial institutions also provide the financial and technical support that is required by many developing and emerging economies at this precise moment. This is why we applaud significant achievements such as the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative and the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatments, as well as the International Monetary Fund's new allocation of special drawing rights. Spain believes that the G20 Common Framework can also benefit middle-income countries that are experiencing liquidity problems due to COVID, in addition, of course, to the more vulnerable low-income countries. Furthermore, we support the creation of a tool in the framework of the International Monetary Fund that would enable advanced countries to channel special drawing rights to the most vulnerable countries without taking into account their level of income, so that they can finance the reforms that are necessary for their sustainable recovery and therefore combat climate change and slow down poverty and inequality. And that's why Spain stands ready to make a suitable contribution to this instrument once it has been approved. We must now ensure that the initiatives underway have the greatest possible impact as soon as possible. Let me be very clear on this point. The 2030 Agenda continues to guide us in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic has dealt a harsh blow to our expectations, but it has also strengthened our conviction that, now more than ever, this is an unrelinquishable and necessary goal. And that is the policy of the Spanish government. Mr. President, I have previously referred to overcoming the pandemic and socio-economic recovery, but without question, the climate emergency is the overriding crisis of our times. There is no room left for denial. The reality of climate change is something we witness on a daily basis, and the consequences are increasingly dramatic. Major wildfires, chronic droughts, floods, and unprecedented weather events are diminishing our resources, dramatically changing our way of life, and causing irreversible loss of biodiversity. Once again, we are addressing a common problem with common causes that call for shared multilateral responses at the highest level. In this regard, I can say that Spain and the European Union are leading by example and represent the bloc of countries with the most ambitious nationally determined contributions. One of the main challenges that we will have at COP26 is to step up our ambition in terms of climate financing and in particular in terms of adaptation. We must honour the commitments adopted on the basis of the Paris Agreement and significantly raise the bar for future commitments. Spain will contribute to this goal by allocating 30 million euros to the Adaptation Fund in 2022, and we will work to ensure that the COP26 in Glasgow is a success. The time is to act now. We must act, we cannot delay. It is also time for us to agree on a new world framework for the protection of biodiversity that goes beyond the goals set for 2020. In this regard, I would like to mention that this year is the 30th anniversary of the Madrid Protocol on Environmental Protection of the Antarctic Treaty. This protocol represented a major step forward in protecting the Antarctic environment and its dependent ecosystems. Next October 4th, an international conference will be held in Madrid to analyse the achievements of these past 30 years and to reflect on the challenges which lie ahead. My country, Spain, has made the climate crisis an absolute priority of its government action. 40% of the investments envisaged in our recovery, transformation and resilience plan will be allocated to the ecological transition. By 2030, 74%, this is our goal, of the electricity we generate and 42% of the total energy we consume will come from renewable sources. And we have just recently approved an ambitious Climate Change and Energy Transition Act in the Spanish Parliament. Decisive advances will only be achieved through the concerted efforts of states, but we must not forget to place people at the heart of our decision-making. That's so important. We must ensure that there are no winners and losers, because ecological transition entails radical changes that will have a very direct impact on people, particularly on the most vulnerable, on their jobs, on their consumer habits. This is why we are not only leading a just recovery project to overcome the economic crisis, but we are also committed, above all, to a just transition. This commitment stems from our absolute conviction that this is the most effective way of achieving new levels of progress and of well-being. Allow me to offer here a very clear example. Spain's Integrated National Energy and Climate Plan envisages that our ecological transition policies will create between 250,000 and 350,000 net annual jobs. Once again, what is just for all always ends up being beneficial for all. Mr. President, our response to these three factors, the pandemic, the economic crisis, and the climate emergency, will undoubtedly determine and shape short and medium-term international policy. Spain will remain active and committed in this process. And to our commitments. Firstly, we are committed to Latin America and the Caribbean, a region with which, as you know, we have very close ties. This year is the 30th anniversary of the first Ibero-American Summit, an anniversary in which we must consider both the immense challenges caused by the pandemic, as well as the internal drama of the drama of the internal displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. This situation is straining the social support systems of several of the countries to their limits. Spain believes that a comprehensive approach that addresses causes and not only consequences is what is required. Spain wishes to maintain its role as the principal agent, strengthening the EU's ties with Latin America and the Caribbean, and we are convinced that doing so will bring shared stability and prosperity to both sides of the relationship. Secondly, we are committed, as you know, to the Mediterranean. We share a destiny with them, a destiny that must necessarily be one of opportunities, prosperity, regional integration and social inclusion with its coastal countries. To this end, we must ensure peace and stability and resolve existing conflicts. We must have a just, lasting and mutually acceptable political solution to the Western Sahara, as established in Security Council resolutions. Spain continues to champion the central role of the United Nations, and we support the Secretary-General's efforts. This year, major steps have been made towards achieving stability on another important front, which is stability in Libya, a process which must be led by the Libyans themselves and which Spain fully supports. Holding elections at the end of the year must be the goal. Thirdly, I would like to highlight that Spain has a new policy for Africa, a continent with immense potential. We wish to support Africans in their own search for prosperity and progress, and are firmly convinced that Africa's progress will also be our own. And my country is committed to the efforts to ensure that security and peace return to the populations of the Sahel. I believe that stability in this region is essential to preserve the security of our citizens on both shores of the Mediterranean. Fourthly, Spain has not forgotten about the frozen conflicts. This autumn, this year, is the 30th anniversary of the Madrid Peace Conference, which brought the Arab nations and Israel together for the first time, giving rise to the peace negotiations that resulted in the Oslo agreements. peace talks must be resumed, I think, so that progress can be made towards the two-state solution. And as regards Afghanistan, we will have to learn to work with this new context, and especially with neighbouring countries, in order to address the humanitarian crisis and prevent greater destabilisation in the region. We must not lower our guard before the threat of terrorism, which already struck a harsh blow during the evacuation missions. Afghanistan cannot be allowed to become a new refuge for terrorists. In short, Spain is firmly committed to the search for international peace and security. We have deployed men and women, both civilians and service people, in the United Nations missions in Lebanon, Mali, the Central African Republic and Colombia. We are present with NATO in Iraq, the Baltic states and in the Mediterranean. Moreover, we contribute more than 25% of the European Union's military forces abroad, participating with particular intensity in the Sahel, a clear commitment to the development of a greater strategic autonomy of the European Union and to the strengthening of our common security and defence policy. On December 31st, 2020, in the context of the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union, Spain and the United Kingdom came to a bilateral understanding regarding Gibraltar. This understanding must serve to lay the foundations for the future relationship of this territory with the European Union, and we trust that an agreement may soon be reached between the European Union and the United Kingdom regarding Gibraltar. This agreement must fully respect United Nations doctrine regarding said territory, with which Spain is fully aligned. It must also respect the legal position of my country as regards sovereignty and jurisdiction concerning Gibraltar. Our goal is to work towards creating an area of social and economic prosperity that encompasses the entire area of Gibraltar and also Campo de Gibraltar. The defence of an international order based on rules and institutions is a strategic priority of the Government of Spain. We demonstrated this a year ago when, together with the Prime Minister of Sweden, I launched an initiative with a group of countries from different parts of the globe ready to exercise their leadership to support multilateralism and strengthen it with specific responses. And since then, we have been working together to fulfil the commitments undertaken in the declaration on the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and we are grateful to the Secretary-General for his efforts in presenting his report on our common agenda, and we commit to strive for its fulfilment. History has taught us that no country can achieve any major milestone from a unilateral, individualistic position, isolating itself in the midst of a globalized world. The enemy of multilateralism is extremism. So let us not allow ourselves to be deceived by those espousing selfishness and individualism, those who would have us believe that the collective causes uniting us are causes that do not merit our efforts. In this context, one of ever-shifting balances in a multipolar world, I think the European Union must take its corresponding leadership role, and it must do so with strength and decisiveness. This has very specific implications, beginning with the need to develop greater strategic autonomy and to strengthen our security and defence policy. And I would also like to underline our readiness to strengthen the Atlantic Alliance and to adapt it to the global challenges of today and tomorrow. Spain will work with in a spirit of commitment and determination to ensure that the next NATO summit, which will take place in Madrid in 2020, will produce a new strategic concept that affords the organisation the instruments and mechanisms it needs to tackle the challenges of the coming decades. Mr. President, I began my address by referring to the hundreds of Afghans who reached Madrid last August 21st, thanks to the joint efforts undertaken with our EU partners and also with NATO. I do not mention it triumphantly, but rather I do so here as a reminder of all those people who in some remote corner of the globe remain unjustly trapped, persecuted and threatened by the enemies of progress and tolerance. In the face of such tragedy, those we managed to evacuate might seem few. Undoubtedly, that's true, but let us not forget that they are human beings full of dreams, desires, and also abilities. In short, human beings just like us who have been given a fresh opportunity to carry on with their lives. They encourage us to continue working on behalf of others. I think especially of the girls and women who have played such a vital role in the development of Afghanistan in recent years. The very future of women teachers, women lawyers, and women journalists is at risk in today's Afghanistan. We must place the rights and freedoms of thousands of women and girls at the forefront of our priorities, because no society that allows only half of its population to move forward and purposely keeps the other half behind is sustainable. And I would also like to call attention to the plight of the almost 10 million Afghan children whose survival depends on humanitarian aid. As UNICEF has reminded us very accurately, the food crisis suffered by the country resulting from the drought has worsened and borders on a monumental humanitarian disaster. Preventing this must be our foremost priority right now. The crisis in Afghanistan has led some to question the way in which certain countries participate on the international stage, and in response to such doubts, I would like to assert here that the democratic model is the only form of government that guarantees the defence and protection of human rights and of individual freedoms, and that it will continue to be the compass and the guiding light for our action. We will continue to defend our belief that every human society in every corner of this planet should be free to live in accordance with the basic principles of freedom, dignity, social justice and participation, respecting established laws and the will of the majority, as well as the rights of minorities, respecting a code that is above that of any other nature or identity, namely that of human rights. Because Afghanistan is not the only scenario in the fight for democracy. This fight is being waged on every continent, including in the world's most developed countries. It is a daily struggle against those who would impose inequality, benefiting a select few, those who seek to exclude or to lay blame at the feet of the most vulnerable minorities, those who incite hatred on the grounds of origin, sex or belief, those who call for walls and borders to keep at bay the ideas of equality, freedom and fraternity. Without question, democracy is threatened. We must be aware of this. Democracy is not a gift bestowed on us, but rather the bounty of a hard-won historical conquest that we must cherish and protect. At this time in which history seems to be speeding up, a time of profound changes in the global order, of new ways of growth and of inhabiting our world, I ask that we step up our commitment to democracy and engage in this common project shared by millions of human beings that continues to welcome us all on equal terms. There are no racial, cultural, historical or anthropological grounds that would justify mutilating freedom, and this is why democracy is the only way forward. There is no question that democracy is the most effective system for improving people's lives, for increasing their prosperity and for creating opportunities for all. Democracy needs no explanation or justification. This is why, begging your indulgence, I will finish by quoting the words from a great Spanish socialist politician of the first half of the last century, Fernando de los Ríos. When he was asked, "Freedom for what purpose?" he simply replied, "Freedom to be free." Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Government of Spain for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.